So, ladies and gentlemen, Boker Tov, good morning, welcome. I'm going to ask that you please mute your microphones. There'll be a moment in which we'll ask you to unmute for the El Malay Rachamim and for Kaddish. And if you have problems muting your microphones, the nice thing about the technology is I can do it for you. What I can't do is unmute you if it's your turn to speak. Welcome. Of course, we gathered this morning with sadness as we remember a teacher and a friend and someone who's been part of this congregation, this community for more than 50 years as a scholar in residence and of teaching Torah. Teaching Torah, though the pun is the use of his last name, Torah through the ages, it's also very appropriate. For Torah is a document through the ages. The Constitution, the foundation, the beginning of the Jewish experience and the Jewish narrative that continues through the ages to our very day. And Dr. Arnold Aegis, Alav HaShalom, was certainly the embodiment of that. What we hope to do this morning is the following. We've asked Rav Baruch to start us off with some teaching of the Parshat HaShavua in Dr. Aegis' memory. And then we'll ask Marilyn Finkelstein, one of his longtime students, to share some memories of being a student of his. Then I will teach a little bit of Torah, and we'll ask if there are any family members that are with us today, if they'd like to share something about Arnold, we'll ask them to do that. And if not, I do have the narrative that Shoshana wrote for our bulletin that we can share. Unfortunately, there's a lot that is going on in Shoshana's life following the death of Arnold, as we all understand. A lot of details that have to take place, including moving to be in a more appropriate living circumstance for her. So she wasn't sure if she'd be able to join us, but she's certainly with us in spirit for sure. So I'm going to invite Rav Baruch to come forward and to share with us some words of Torah. And I will put him on the spotlight so that everybody can see him while he's doing so. Baruch, please just unmute yourself and go right ahead.
I am unmuted, at least it seems so on my side. Can you hear me?
Yes, a little bit louder, yeah. Can hear you.
Okay. And Marcy, I see that you're on, and I'm not sure who else from the family. I see some of the Wapners are on, and I just want personally, again, to extend my condolences. This is Chaval al De'avdinu Mishtaq. It's just very sad about losing somebody who is so precious to us. This is en mémoire et hommage for Arnold. I'm going to speak a little bit about an area that was so important to him and hopefully share some Torah that will be also appropriate. In European history, the period from approximately 1680 to the end of the 1700s is frequently referred to as the Enlightenment or the Age of Reason. And at the heart of 18th century Enlightenment is a loosely organized activity of prominent French thinkers of the mid-decades of the 1700s, the so-called philosophes. And these would include Voltaire, D'Alembert, Diderot, Montesquieu. These were all people that Arnold lived with for many years, studying and teaching about them. Les Philosophes were an informal group who appreciated the writings of classical authors, were guided by the perspectives of the British empirical thinkers, and advocated the use of reason to discern truth and understand humanity. They questioned the truth value of religious belief in general, of Christian faith in particular, and the proper place of religion in society. They claimed that the advance of philosophie, that is the use of reason, would promote an enlightened day of happiness, toleration, and progress. It was about these writers that Arnold devoted much of his research and writing. And he was joined by Arthur Hertzberg, who also wrote about the French Enlightenment and the Jews, and more recently, David Nirenberg in Anti-Judaism, and Ronald Schechter in his book, Obstinate Hebrews. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, whose Shiva coincides with this week, also devoted some of his writing to demonstrate, in opposition to Les Philosophes, that Judaism brought to Western civilization intellectual saliency and significant value. Surprisingly, Enlightenment thinkers discussed and wrote about France's tiny Jewish population at great length. Why was there so much thinking about Jews when they were a minority of less than 1% and had little economic and virtually no political power? Les Philosophes paid attention to the Jews because, as Schechter wrote, thinking about Jews enabled them to reflect on general issues that concerned them, such as the role of tradition in religion, the perfectibility of human nature, national identity, and the nature of citizenship. The negative qualities that these avatars of modernity rejected in society were to be found in the Jews, making anti-Judaism an essential component of modern thought. Despite the aura of religious tolerance surrounding the philosophers of the Enlightenment, many had nothing but contempt for Jews and Judaism. Diderot declared that the Jews were capable of any villainy. There is to be found among them only a confused mixture of the principles of reason and of revelation, an affected and often impenetrable obscurity, principles that lead to fanaticism, a blind respect for the authority of the doctors and of antiquity. In a word, all the defects indicative of an ignorant and superstitious nation. Another French philosopher, Baron d'Holbach, called the Jews the vilest people on earth. The majority of these thinkers believed that making Jews full citizens was problematic. They argued that Jews' numerous ritual laws would get in the ways of civic duties. And their most pervasive belief was that if Jews were to throw off their old customs, they could be socially improved. They would undergo what was called régénération, regeneration. And most of the debates on the Jewish question from the 1780s to the middle of the 19th century sought to determine whether the Jewish religion was an impediment to full regeneration. While Montesquieu was more or less liberal on this area, seeing Jews as having the possibility of regeneration, Voltaire tended to see les Juifs as a repository of blind religious obedience and unthinking observance that could be deemed the source of the priestcraft and intolerance that he and other thinkers sought to repudiate in Christianity. In hundreds of letters and essays, Voltaire passionately argued against the Jews. He believed that the Jews were Asiatic, outside the classical Greco-Roman tradition. And according to Voltaire, The beliefs of the Jews were absurd, stemming from a people who were slaves to the Egyptians and had slavishly copied the evil practices of their masters. In one essay called Lettres de Memmieux à Cicéron, Voltaire adopted the pose of a classic Roman, Memmius, who praises Cicero for an anti-Semitic oration. And Voltaire then adds, "They are all of them born with raging fanaticism in their hearts, just as the Bretons and the Germans are born with blonde hair. I would not be in the least surprised that if these people would not that these people would not someday become deadly to the human race." Voltaire wrote to some Jews who objected to his viewpoint, "You seem to be the maddest of the lot. The Kafirs, the Hottentots, the Negroes of New Guinea are much more reasonable and more honest than your ancestors, the Jews. You have surpassed all nations in impertinent fables, in bad conduct, and in barbarism. You deserved to be punished, for this is your destiny." In an article that Voltaire wrote in his philosophical dictionary, he defined the Jews as a small, new, ignorant, crude people, and declared, "The Jews then treat their history and ancient fables as their clothesmen treat their old coats. They turn them and sell them for new at as high a price as possible. It is a singular instance of human stupidity that we have so long considered the Jews as a nation which taught all others, while their historian Josephus himself confesses the contrary." We are at this point concluding the Torah reading of Abraham, about whom I'll say a little bit later. But regarding Abraham, Voltaire commented, "There was one remark in particular to make about the history of this patriarch, regarded as the father of the Jews and the Arabs. His principal children were Isaac, born of his wife by a miraculous favor of providence, and Ishmael, born of his servant. It was in Isaac that the race of the patriarch was to be blessed. Yet Isaac was the father only of an unfortunate and contemptible people." Unfortunately, Voltaire's ideas did not die with him. They were resurrected throughout Europe for the next 150 years. After his death, Voltaire was quoted many times to prove that not merely the Jews' religion, but the essential character of the Jews was evil. And in the 1850s, the influential French scholar Ernst Renan popularized a racial concept of Semites. Echoing Voltaire, Renan argued that the Jews have no mythology, epic, no science, no philosophy, no fiction, no plastic arts, no civic life. The legacy of Les Philosophes and of their rationalist anti-Semitism was eventually taken up by the revolutionary left and the anti-democratic right. And of course, we saw it full-blown under Nazism. Let me turn to the Torah portion for a moment and share with you a very small idea that is reflective of Arnold Aegis. In Chaye Sarah, the Torah portion for this Shabbat, Avraham does two things. He purchased a family burial site in the land of Canaan, and he arranges for the marriage of his son Yitzchak. A single field with a double cave gave Avraham and his family, and ultimately the Hebrews, the Jewish people, a stake in what would become Eretz Yisrael. The union of Yitzchak and Rivka and the birth, according to our tradition, of Yaakov and Esav during Avraham's lifetime was sufficient for our patriarch to feel that God had blessed Avraham with everything, bakol. Avraham could die in peace because he had begun something and would continue. Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor. It's not for you to complete the work, nor are you free to desist from it. And with that in mind, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks wrote, the meaning of this is clear. If you ensure that your children will continue to live for what you have lived for, then you can have faith that they will continue your journey until eventually they reach the destination. Abraham did not need to see all the land in Jewish hands, nor did he need to see the Jewish people become numerous. He had taken the first step. He had begun the task, and he knew that his descendants would continue it. He was able to die serenely because he had faith in God and faith that others would complete what he had begun. The same was certainly true of Sarah. And I would say the same was certainly true of Arnold Aegis, who with his family and his scholarship, with his writing and with his many devoted adult students, began something that will continue and will serve as a rejoinder to and a rejection of the negative ideology of the philosophers that he taught and studied for many years. Shoshana, Sharon Zichrona and David, Aaron and Dina and Marcy, and of course the grandchildren, Devorah and Ephron, Esther and Roni, Yaakov Mordechai, Sarah, Aviva, and Yoni, all represent the continuity of life and Torah values that were so important to Arnold. Those ideals were certainly part of the heritage that Arnold's siblings shared, Matt and Sam, Zichronam Livracha, and Miriam, who we hope will live for many years. You all stand with pride against those who would demean and diminish Jews and Judaism. You are and represent a living testimony on behalf of Arnold's research and writing and life. Again, Rabbi Sacks, to place yourself in God's hands, to know that you are part of a larger narrative, and to believe that others will continue what you began, is to achieve a satisfaction in life that cannot be destroyed by circumstance. Abraham and Sarah had that faith, and they were able to die with a sense of fulfillment. To be happy does not mean that you have to have everything you want or everything you were promised. It means simply to have done what you were called on to do, to have made a beginning, and then to have passed on the baton to the next generation. The righteous, teaches the Talmud, even in death, are regarded as though they were still alive, because the righteous leave a living trace of those who come after them. That was enough for Abraham and Sarah. I think it was also enough for Arnold Aegis, Zichrono Livracha, who was privileged to be honored with the Killam Award, honored by his university, honored by our congregation, by his friends, by his colleagues, and most of all, by his family. Yehi Zichro Baruch. May his memory bring us all continued blessing. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. That was, as always, a wonderful, educational, and meaningful piece of Torah that that you shared with us in Arnold's memory. We're now going to ask Marilyn Finkelstein, one of his longtime students, to reflect on her experience with Dr. Aegis. Marilyn.
It's really a great honor to be able to speak about Dr. Aegis Oliver Shalom. I'm really honored. I grew up in an Orthodox family, and I was always a curious child, and I asked a lot of questions, still do. But always the answer was the same. This is the way it's written, and this is the way it is. So I suggest you don't ask any questions. I don't know if it was because of my gender, but I know that I never got any answers. I heard about Dr. Aegis' class, and I started to attend. And suddenly, I have to say to you that Dr. Aegis of blessed memory opened up the world of Torah for me. Not only were there answers, and there's never one answer, he just opened up that world. Things began to make sense to me because of him. He was a great teacher. Now, we've had great teachers at Bethesda. I've been a member over 60 years, but he was really special. He had this ability to make you feel you were contributing, whether you interrupted him, whether it was an inappropriate question, he answered. And he also had this gentle sense of humor. If he didn't like something, with a twinkle in his eye, he would say, well, I'll take that home under advisement. If you remember that. Nobody was insulted, but everybody knew that he didn't like that. I see people smiling because they remember that. Usually after before the Parsha, we were also treated to a book review. And his phrase was, this came over the transom this week. And he would discuss some really wonderful book. And that was an amazing discussion. Usually followed, not always, by a fictional book. And he had the most amazing memory, as you all know. He not only remembered the publisher, the editor, the author, he would remember the protagonist. And he could quote and parse a sentence or a phrase in 3 languages, English, French, and Hebrew. And that was an extra treat. But most of all, he made everybody feel important. It didn't matter what you asked and when you asked it, you were contributing to this class. He often said to me, and I think good teachers say this, that they learn from their pupils. I don't know, although we had some amazing scholars in our class. I see Irving here. He's one of them. They certainly knew the Torah. Followed by the book review, we would have current events. He came with his little scraps of paper from the newspaper, from the forwards, he had all these little scraps. And believe me, that initial, some amazing discussions, which went on and on. But he managed to segue it into the Parsha. Finally, we got to the Parsha. And it was the most interesting of all. I learned so very much. And as a testament to him, I tell you that hour went so quickly, it wasn't even like an hour. It just went. But interestingly enough, when Dr. Aegis left, there was still a group sitting there discussing either the Parsha or the current event. And I thought to myself, how absolutely wonderful. He's enabling us to have the mitzvah of studying Torah. And isn't that what it's about? Well, I'm sure he's going to be missed. I'm going to repeat some of the things that Rabbi said. He's going to be missed by many, thousands probably, because he taught in Florida as well. I miss him. I miss his class. Sometimes it was, not sometimes, it was always one of the highlights of my week. But his legacy will always be there. Now, when I look at a Parsha or I look at the Torah, I think about, I wonder what Dr. Aegis thought about this. He was like a scientist who looked at a piece of material or a diamond and he examined it from everywhere, underneath, around, and he made sense. To me, I look at the Parsha and I say, well, how can I make life better? What does this Parsha mean to me today? That's what his teachings did for me. So he will be missed. How fortunate was I and all the other students to be taught by this amazing scholar. I was very, very lucky, but he's left this legacy, and I know that he'll never be forgotten, certainly not by me or my family, who I often share, especially my grandchildren, Rabbi. I would tell them what I learned today, and they like to hear that. So I leave you with, I hope that his memory will be for a blessing. I know it will. It was an honor to speak about him, and my sincere condolences to the family.
Thank you, Marilyn. That was really lovely. I was thinking as you were sharing your thought and you're asking the question as you're studying the Parsha, what would Dr. Aegis say? Elevates him to the level of Rashi. That's what students of Torah always do, is they ask, what would Rashi say? What does this one say? And when you ask, what does Dr. Aegis say? It just goes to show the profound impact that he has had on his students, on you, and on thousands of others. I'm going to share a few thoughts of the Parshat HaShavua from the perspective of current events within, of course, the Zecher, Dr. Aegis, Zichrono Livracha. And I hope to inspire all of us that are here today in much the same way in which he inspired his students. This year, our theme for Bet Tzedek is Olam Chesed Yibaneh. It comes from the Psalms that God built the foundation of the world on Chesed, and that our responsibility is to take that foundation and to build a world filled of Chesed, of kindness. This theme came out of our observations of our community and many, many other communities around the world in terms of our response to COVID. One of the things that we've seen, one of the elements of the human condition that I think has allowed so many people to respond in the way in which we have, is all the different kindnesses that have been generated as a result of this. For surely, COVID and the lockdowns and the isolation and the physical distancing has reminded us of the values that matter most, the values that are the foundation on the world, of the world in which we live, and the foundation of the relationships that we must build to make this world meaningful. And that is the importance of human interaction and of kindness. Nowhere, perhaps, in the Torah do you see this more clearly expressed than in this week's Parsha of Chayei Sarah. In this week's Parsha, as Rav Baruch mentioned, it begins with this notion that Abraham has reached the end of his life, and the Torah says that he's blessed bakol, in all things. As we think about Hanukkah approaching in just a couple of weeks, it's always a reminder. It's like, so what do you get to the guy? What do you get? What's the gift that you get to the guy who's got everything, who's been blessed bakol? Rashi looks at bakol and he understands that the Hebrew word bakol shares the gematria, the numeric equivalent to the word ben. Abraham is blessed in all things, especially in that he has a son. But if he is going to continue, if his new tradition for which he is the founder of monotheism, of this unique relationship with God, if that is going to continue, it's not enough for Abraham to be blessed with the son, but that his son must also have a family of his own, must create another generation for that tradition to be passed on. Otherwise, it ends with Abraham if there's no grandchildren, so to speak, to pass that tradition to future generations. So Abraham sets out to find a wife for Yitzchak, for Isaac. He sends his servant, who is unnamed in the Parsha, but we know him from other sources to be Eliezer. He sends Eliezer to Haran with a mission to find a wife for Isaac. And here's one of those places where the Torah speaks in euphemism. Abraham makes Eliezer take an oath by grabbing his thigh. And this is an oath for future progeny. So the thigh was probably more specific, related to Abraham's genitalia and the notion of passing it on to future generations. So Eliezer has to take this oath that he's going to go and he's going to find a wife for Isaac. And Abraham's concern is solely that she come from his tribe, that Isaac not be allowed to leave Eretz Israel, which is why he sends Eliezer, and that Isaac not be allowed to marry a woman from other than Abraham's tribe. He wants to make sure that Isaac is set up maximally to build an Israelite house, a house within the traditions of the tribe of Abraham, that he has a spouse from that tribe and then pass that on to future children. So Eliezer takes the oath and he heads up to Haran with 10 camels filled with gifts, all theoretically part of the bride price that he's going to pay for whoever this bride is going to be. When Eliezer arrives, he does what any traveler would do. He goes to the well. He's thirsty. He has to feed his camels. And the well is also, we know, it's kind of like, the center square where the community in that time would meet. And where Eliezer would have the maximum opportunity to meet the people in the community and perhaps to find right away a bride for Isaac. Eliezer makes a deal with God. He says, God, I'll tell you what, the first woman who comes and offers me water to drink and a place to sleep, and water for my camels, she will be the bride for Isaac. Notice the difference here. That's not what Abraham asked for. Abraham was only interested that the bride be from Haran, be from his tribe, and that Isaac not leave Canaan. That's it. Eliezer seems to add additional conditions to find the perfect bride for Isaac. And those conditions ultimately are the conditions of Haknasat Orchim, of the welcoming of strangers and of guests, and of Chesed. Now, how do we know that it's Chesed? Well, miraculously, the minute Eliezer finishes making this bargain with God, who appears but Rebecca. And she comes up to Eliezer and she asks him who he is and what he's doing there. She offers him water and a place for the evening. And then she offers to water his camels. Now, if you've ever been to Israel or to any other location where there are camels, and you've seen a camel drink water, you know it is not a pleasant viewing experience. You also know that it takes a long time. It takes a camel about an hour to drink its full of water. And so if Eliezer brought 10 camels with him to Haran, and Rebecca offered to water all of his camels, you can imagine Rebecca schlepping back and forth for half a day to schlep the water for those camels. If that's not an act of chesed, I don't know what is. And certainly the rabbis, the commentaries of our tradition, they looked at this and said, yes, indeed, Rivka not only showed chesed to a stranger, to a ger, to Eliezer when he arrived, but kal v'chomer, she showed kindness to the camels, to 10 of them. And the rabbis understood that anybody who would show that kind of kindness to an animal, kal v'chomer would they show kindness to their beloved, to their spouse, to their family, to their children, and to the tradition of our people. So Rivka becomes the perfect bride for Isaac, not only because she fulfills Abraham's conditions of coming from his ancestral tribe, but even more so because she becomes the embodiment in our tradition of chesed. When we look at this world that we're in today, if we're talking about Torah for the ages and current events, there's so much anxiety that is going on in the world. We're anxious about COVID. We're anxious about the economy and its impact on our personal lives and the lives of our families. We're anxious about the rise of anti-Semitism in the world and other forms of hate and racism. We're anxious about politics. We're anxious about so many things. And yet at the end of the day, what gives us the strength and the resiliency to overcome our anxiety, our chesed, is chesed. The chesed that we provide for each other, the chesed that is provided for us, and the chesed upon which olam yibaneh, this world is built. That is an inspiration that comes directly from this week's Torah reading. It is as current and relevant today as it was 3,000 years ago when the story took place at a well in Haran. It is indeed, I think, indicative of Torah through the ages. Zecher, Dr. Arnold Ages, Zichrono Livracha.
Yishar koach.
Thank you. At this point, I'd like to ask one of the family members that may be here. I saw that Marcy had signed on, and some of the grandchildren. If there's someone who would like to share a few words personally about Arnold, please do so. And if not, I do have what Shoshana wrote for this synagogue that I can share.
This is Dina Aegis. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
I'm with my mother. We're watching together. Our video's not on, but we've been on since the beginning. And thank you for the beautiful tributes. I just wanted to say that I have a bad habit of reading obituaries. And for all the great people for whom I read the obituaries, all I want to know is, what did their family think about them? And I just want everybody to know that even though my father was a prominent member of the community and belonged to so many people, and Beth Tzedek was not his full-time job. His full-time job was commuting to Waterloo every day. And despite that, he was there for us. He taught us how to ride our bikes. He took us skating every Saturday night at Forest Hill. And everybody needs to know that he was a great father. And that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. And that, of course, is the greatest tribute that any parent, any father or mother could ask for. At this time, we'll ask everyone to please rise. Cantor Ezer will recite an El Malei Rachamim.
El Malei Rachamim Shochen Bameromim Hamitzei Menucha Nechona Al Kanfrei HaShechina B'ma'alot Kedoshim U'Tehorim Kezohar harakia mazhirim et nishmat morenu hanichbad Uri ben Yaakov shehalach leolamo בעבור שנלבו צדקה בעד הזכרת נשמתו בגן עדן תהי מנוחתו לכן בעל הרחמים, יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, בצרו בצרה חיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר אמן.
Amen. El Malay Rachamim, exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the soul of Dr. Arnold Ages, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace, and let us say, Amen. I'd just like to say in closing, first of all, thank you to Rav Baruch and to Marilyn for sharing your thoughts and your teachings. Thank you to the family for being here and for sharing that wonderful tribute to Arnold, of course, first and foremost as a parent. Torah through the ages is why we're here. That's the essence of Jewish existence, of Jewish living. And so we intend to continue on Thursday mornings at 10 a.m. This opportunity for people to come together and to learn Torah in relationship to current events, to the world that is going on around us. We are proud to have set up the Torah through the Aegis Fund to help support that initiative of high-level academic learning of Torah in a modern circumstance. And we invite you in tribute to Dr. Aegis to make a contribution to the Torah through the Aegis Fund. We'll have an announcement as soon as we can and have finalized the continuation of the class. But in the meantime, we want to wish everyone well. We want to remind you to please follow the guidance of the public health officials as we're dealing with the second wave of the coronavirus. Remember to practice physical distancing, to wear masks, to wash your hands, and to limit the times in which you're in large gatherings and crowds. If you need assistance, someone to help with the shopping, someone to pick up the phone and give you a call, someone to help you figure out the technology, please contact one of us at Bet Tzedek. We'll be certain and happy to help you connect with those that will provide that assistance for you. Thank you to the family. May Arnold's memory ever be for a blessing and inspiration for the study and the living of Torah. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Cool.
Thank you for doing this, Rabbi. It's very meaningful.
Cool.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And I just want to let everyone know again that Shoshana's words will be in the next bulletin, so you can see them there.